You may have heard that little message. I am starting to record. These meetings are recorded. We do that so that if there's a neighbor or somebody that wasn't able to join us tonight, they will have access to this. So that's kind of a benefit. Those will be available here a few days after this meeting on NDOT's website. We'll provide that information here at the end of the meeting. But once again, good evening. Thanks for taking your time to join us this evening for a few minutes to talk about traffic calming on Oakley Drive. I did speak to Council Member Johnston earlier. I see someone by phone. That's not you, is it, Courtney? See someone there on mute. If you're calling in and ending it on 36, you're on mute, which is okay. You feel free to unmute yourself. We do give participants in these meetings the ability to do that. So feel free to, as we go through this, unmute yourself, ask questions, make comments, however you like. We're here for you. And these are usually pretty small group meetings. And so just feel free to just have a discussion here. So I mentioned the recording. I mentioned the mute. The only other, or the unmuting, the only other thing I would say is just if you're not talking, usually works a little better if you do stay on mute while you're not talking. We'll get going here. We'll cover a couple of things in this meeting. First thing is I'll give you a little bit of background on the program and how Oakley Drive got inducted into it. Secondly, we'll take a look at the very preliminary concept that we've put together for traffic calming on the street. And then lastly, we'll share with you some next steps, where we go from here, how long things take, all of those types of things, and be sure you're aware of that process. So with that, we'll get going here. Just a little bit of a background. I think by now, the more of these projects that have rolled out to the street, the more people have gotten familiar with traffic calming. I think some of this information is pretty self-evident, but if you're not aware of the program, this is an arm of NDOT. And by the way, my name is Jeff Hammond. I'm a consultant that works for NDOT. That's the Nashville Department of Transportation. And so this is a service that is brought by the City Department of Transportation, really focusing on residential streets. We don't do traffic calming in commercial areas or industrial areas. We do try to focus on residential streets for two reasons, really. One is we know it's a safety concern, but then the other one is just it can be a real quality of life issue for people that living on streets that have significant speeding. We do focus on physical solutions as opposed to just giving information back. Physical solutions usually are taking the form of something raised in the roadway that you either have to drive over or have to drive around. We have found that nothing slows traffic down quite as effectively as that type of a countermeasure. And then the last thing is we do focus on speed reduction as opposed to trying to shift traffic off of one street onto another. That's not the intent. We get some feedback that happens. I don't doubt at all that happens in some instances, but that's not our objective. We really are trying to just keep traffic where it is and get it to slow down and drive in a more responsible way. With that, we do work in the engineering world. NDOT oversees the right-of-way. They can affect change in the right-of-way on our public streets, but that's about it. We can't write tickets. We can't do those types of things. So we have a great partnership with MNPD, but we know a lot of times that they are just very limited in their resources and how much time they can commit to parking a cruiser out there and writing tickets. And as much as we might like and appreciate if they would do that on these streets, they're just out there doing a lot of other important work. So enforcement is another big part of this. We know that, as is education. And you may have seen some new kind of commercials come out by NDOT having to do with speeding and the impacts of speeding. Those are pretty impactful. So we're trying to target this across more than just engineering. But we're here tonight to talk about the changes in the roadway. We like to show this slide. It's kind of sobering, but it's really good information about why we do these types of projects and why there's such an emphasis, not only in Nashville, but nationally, about speeding. And it's information like this where, our neighborhoods are places where, of course, we have drivers, but we also have a lot of walkers and bicyclists. And we know that the chance of survival in the unfortunate event of a crash between, say, a pedestrian and a car is much greater if that car is going at a more responsible speed in the 20-25 mile an hour range. So those chances of surviving that incident go way down the faster that car is going. Another reason, or another piece of information we like to share about the program, is it has been traditionally and remains very much in demand. In this cohort that Oakley's a part of, we're still sitting at about 500 applications for streets just like this one. We don't get all of those twice a year, but as we carry over, that backlog just seems to be growing. It's not really going down any, and we just say that to let you know that unfortunately you're in good company in this. If you've noticed some speeding on the street, these are all applications that have come in that have noticed the same thing in their neighborhoods, and they're from one end of Davidson County to the other. They affect all neighborhoods everywhere. So to counter that 500 street backlog, we're doing about 50 projects a year. We do those in two different application windows and implementation cohorts at a time. So gives you some idea of the workload there. We always like to plug Hub Nashville because sometimes things will come up in these meetings and someone will say, well, can we get a stop sign, or can we get a sidewalk, or something like that? And those are absolutely fine requests, and you can make those requests through Hub Nashville. We don't do those type of improvements or changes in the traffic calming program, but there is a place there that those types of requests can go, and that's Hub Nashville. That's a great resource if you're not familiar with it. Open to any resident of Davidson County, and not just for transportation requests. It touches about every department in Metro. Kind of a one-stop shop, and then you can track progress of those requests. Back to how we select our projects. And, if we've got 500 requests all over Davidson County, obviously we can't get to all of those. And so this is the way we prioritize those. And if every time an application comes in, we go out and we collect data on those streets. And you see some of the data that we collect here represented in this pie chart. This is how we weight that data in order to make a selection for which streets we're going to work on for traffic calming. About 70% of the data is probably what you would expect it is. It's the volume of traffic on the road, how many cars there are in a day, and it's also the speed that we measure on that traffic. But then there's another 30% that goes into the score that has to do with some more of those vulnerable users, like we were talking about. So, is there a documented case of a pedestrian crash? Is one metric that we look at. We also look at, does the street have otherwise safe accommodations for like a pedestrian? In the case of Oakley, you don't have sidewalks, and so your score goes up. You get more points for that. And then lastly, we look at, is this a street in a place that makes it more likely that you would have people walking? Are you close to a school, or are you close to a park? Those types of things. And so we take all of that data for all these streets, roll it all up, and rank those. And typically we're taking the top 25 of those projects at a time. So that's how Oakley got here. Here's some of the information specific to the street. The speed that we measured on the street was 35 miles an hour. Now that's what we call the 85th percentile speed. It's just a statistical way in our industry we look at that. What it says is 15% of the traffic is going faster than 35. That's a relative, that's a relative score to all the other the streets that we collected. It's kind of in the middle. It's not super high. It's obviously not very low. It's 10 miles over the speed limit. So, I mean, it is significant, but it's about kind of middle of the pack for the streets that we're doing traffic calming on. The volume is right at 1,200 cars a day. That surprises people a lot of times. That doesn't surprise us. Again, that's kind of a middling level of traffic volume so no problem there. We'll do our type of traffic calming on streets up to about 5,000 cars a day. So that gives you any idea. We're well below that. The street width is about 20 miles an hour. Again, typical, maybe slightly on the narrow side, which when it comes to speeding is usually a good thing. We like working on narrower streets. I think we get a little more effectiveness. There's prevailing research that says the wider the street is and the wider a field of vision a driver has, the faster they tend to go. I think there's some truth there. So we're working with a narrower street, which is good. And then this segment is about half a mile long. You see it here. Oakley is the portion of Oakley that we're doing is from Trousdale essentially to the end of the street there at the entrance to Aberdeen Woods at Cochran. You see it in red there. This is a screenshot of an interactive map that is also on NDOT's traffic calming webpage. It's kind of nice. You can pan around all over the county and see the status of all of our projects. And you're red, which just means we're in the phase that we are. We're meeting with the neighborhood and kind of developing a project. But you see some blue ones on there. Those are streets that have received traffic calming at some level. I would point probably to Stillwood, I think it's Stillwood over there. If you know what that is, across this creek, the dotted blue line. I know it got traffic speed cushions put on it fairly recently. That's what the blue lines represent. So if you haven't experienced speed cushions, you can navigate to your closest one and drive over those and check them out. The other color I'd point to is the little purple line. You see one on Creve Road and maybe a couple of others. That just indicates that we already have an application in on those streets. They have not been selected. But before you go put an application, you can check this out and see, if there's already one on file. And on those purple streets, there is. So may be helpful for you. Let me go now through a couple of the tools that we have in our toolkit, things that are eligible under the traffic calming program. We'll start with really the bread and butter of this program, which is speed cushions. I mean, we're using these on 95+% of the projects that we work on. I think a lot of people just think of traffic calming in Nashville as the speed cushion program, and that's okay. That is a lot of what we do, and for good reason. We have seen over the years that we've been putting these speed cushions in that they're effective. They hold up well. They're consistent. People are getting to where, they understand how to drive them, what they do, why they're there, those types of things. And so that consistency is a good thing, I think, when a street has received these, they tend to be more effective. They're only about 3 inches tall. And then they're organized in these patterns here. Sometimes it's a series of 2, sometimes it's a series of 3 or more. The idea there is that we just want to be sure that we're going from edge to edge and not making it so that a car can drive around those and not have to drive over them. They are tapered on the leading and trailing edge, and we can order them in different lengths. So the longer the speed cushion is, really the more gradual or the less aggressive it is. That lets you drive over it a little bit faster. The shorter it is, it just ramps up and straight back down. We typically reserve those for more of our very urban neighborhoods. You think Germantown or East Nashville or something like that, where we're bringing about, really a more aggressive slowing of traffic. We'll use a 7 foot and one of the shorter speed cushions. They're all 6 feet wide, so even very large trucks can't totally straddle them. But the reason there are brakes in them as opposed to going all the way across is because of the lessened impact to emergency vehicles. And so an ambulance or a fire truck or something really large can come much closer to straddling them and is almost not affected at all. They may have to slow down a little bit, but not like you might if you're in your Prius or something like that. And for that reason, Metro has really gone to almost exclusive use of the speed cushion because of that impact to emergency vehicles, which we know is really important. Another tool that we have is a really close cousin, and that is the speed table. That is the one that goes all the way across. It's made by the same manufacturer, and so it's got a lot of the positive aspects to it. However, it just doesn't have that break in it, and so for that reason, we're not using them very often. They haven't been put in parks and some things like that, maybe where sometimes emergency vehicles or access is not quite as critical. There is some before and after data. NDOT is collecting more of that, but we do have some. I think most people, as they drive over these, they recognize, oh yeah, they're working, and don't need data to kind of prove that. But we have seen, as some of the earlier ones were put down, speed reductions in the neighborhood of 9 or 11 or 13 miles an hour, something like that. It really depends on where speeds were to begin with, and then the configuration and all of that. But we do have data showing that they are pretty effective. Another tool that we have in our toolbox is the radar feedback sign, which is pretty self-explanatory. I know there are some already in this Creve Hall area. Hogan Road has them, I know, and I think there's some on Troutdale here as well. And some people swear by them and say they absolutely make a difference. Some people say, yeah, they start out good, but as people get used to them, they may not be as effective. And so some of that data is still being collected as well. We do have good before and after data in the short term saying that they are very effective. I think the question is that longer term effectiveness. We will use these a lot of times when we can't use something like a speed cushion. Trousdale, for example, it's just got too much traffic. So, we, as I mentioned, we will do speed cushions up to 5,000 cars a day. Trousdale's more than that. And so we might use a tool like this just to give a good reinforcement back to the driver that, hey, you're going a little fast or whatever. Sometimes we'll also use these in places where we can't otherwise get a speed cushion, like steep hills, sharp curves. Some of the streets we work on just have one driveway after the next, and it's really hard to get in a speed cushion without blocking somebody's driveway, which we don't want to do. So there are some instances like that where this can be a good stopgap measure. Another thing that we will look at is the pavement markings on the street, with the idea that sometimes on very wide streets, pavement width, wide streets, that if we can visually narrow those, even by just using some painted stripes, sometimes that will, have an impact in helping drivers to go slower. So we'll look at that as well. Kind of an extreme example of that is in more urban areas. We'll look at some of these bigger intersections from a bulb out standpoint. Try to narrow the street so that some of these intersections were built with big sweeping or wide radiuses that kind of invite cars to enter the road quickly. And so if we can narrow that down, we'll do that using bulb outs like you see here. But again, that's for a lot of where you have a lot of pavement, and usually more urban areas where you have a lot of pedestrian activity and those types of things. Chicanes is one that is really specialized. There's only 2 or 3 of these in all of Davidson County. And it really introduces an artificial meandering of the street, and creates some turns that drivers have to follow. It works okay if there's parked cars like you see here. I think this is probably on Fairfax down in the Hillsborough Village area, but it kind of takes some special conditions for that to be a good fit for a street. And then traffic circles. We'll do these occasionally. They kind of have gone in fits and starts here in Metro. There are some out there that you'll see. These have some real complications sometimes for school buses, for instance. Really large vehicles like that can have a problem navigating around these. So we're still working with NDOT on what some of those policies need to be in the design standards for using a traffic circle. It takes again an awful lot of pavement in an intersection for that to even fit, and so but it can be a good tool in some cases. So here's where we like to start with you all in your street and just show you again our very preliminary thoughts on what a project might consist of here on Oakley. Now, Oakley's an interesting one. I mentioned it's kind of narrow, and that's a good thing for us, but it's also got some hills, as you all know. And so one thing I tried to do is kind of highlight those areas. So you see a yellow bar here in some of these areas that we haven't been out on site yet. We do that in the next step, but just using Google and all, we can tell we're probably going to exceed our thresholds for where we can put speed cushions on this street. So just keep that in mind. As you see that yellow part, that just means there's a pretty significant grade there, and we are aware of that. So looking at this image, you see Trousdale on the left-hand side of your screen where the little stop sign is, and Oakley is the purple line that runs through over to Cochran at the right-hand side of your screen. What we are proposing with those three little yellow trapezoids there are three sets of speed cushions in between there, in more of the flat areas where we can get those in. How we come up with that is we will look at the total length of the street. In this case, as I mentioned, it's a half mile, and I mean almost exactly a half mile, 2640, and then we will take that and we'll divide it by what we like our spacing to be for speed cushions. So we know that if we can get something like 400 to 600 feet, typically, maybe a little longer in more suburban or rural areas, maybe a little shorter in urban areas, but something in that ballpark of around 600 feet, that'll be a good spacing for us. That will create kind of a consistent slow speed from one end of the project to the other. It's close enough together that somebody won't drive over them typically and then just gun it to get to the next one really fast. But it's far enough apart too that it's not totally obnoxious for y'all that have to drive over them every day, and that it might push traffic to some other street. I don't think in this case there's a lot of other streets we're going to push traffic to. I think this is will have pretty limited impact there. But nonetheless, we don't want to overdo it, and I certainly think that is possible. So in this case, if we take that little formula there, we're at about 660 feet. Again, if we had our preferences, we might try to get one more set of speed cushions in there and shorten that just a little bit. Given the grades, I'm not sure we can, but even at 660, I think we'll have a good result there in terms of lowering the speeds. I'm trying to think. You may be familiar with Elysian Fields, which is over by the zoo, close to you. I don't know if you ever go on that side of Trousdale or not, but those are probably further apart. That's a busier street than what we're working with here, so we use longer speed cushions there and kind of put them a little further apart. So, but again, it's I think we're still well within our guidelines there for these. I want to stop for a minute. I've talked a lot, and a couple of you are on here and might have an opinion, and we'd like to hear it. Any thoughts about the program at all, or what we're proposing on your street? And again, you're probably muted, so you just need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, first and foremost, Jeff, I appreciate your time and efforts putting all this together and jumping on a call with, I guess, three of us here. There's been quite a bit of angst about this sort of stuff. I don't think people talking about speed cushions is the most popular idea. But to your knowledge, is there anything else that's can we do this in steps? Like maybe look at the radar first, and then if that's still not slowing people down, then work to a cushion aspect, or is this basically a blanket? This is our one time to get people to slow down here.
Yeah, good question, and we hear that sometimes because you're not at all. That's not at all uncommon. Somebody says, how about we try to ease into it and kind of take an iterative approach, which makes all the sense in the world. Unfortunately, given the amount of demand that we've got and the resources that the city has, we really try to get it right on the front end. Now we're going to talk about this. There is a voting process, and this is the best way we have figured out in order to give everybody, their say on whether this is right for your street or not. And so we don't want to go into a voting situation if we know there's just a bunch of outcry against it. This process is to hear those concerns and try to think together what other tools we might have. But you kind of saw the tools. It's not it's not a really long list. So yeah, in answer to the question, there's not a real high likelihood chance if we in these calls and through these meetings say, I think what the street would work best would be a radar feedback sign. That's absolutely okay. But I don't think there's a real high chance that we're going to turn around and come back and put in speed cushions. Now, I will say, to my knowledge, there's not a limitation on, can a street reapply after they may have already received some speed, some traffic calming. So, you put in feedback signs hypothetically, and a couple of years go by, and someone says it just isn't working. Can we reapply? I think you could, and then you go back in and get, uh, reanalyzed against everybody else. So, and then I guess we got to deal with whatever that outcome is. If it got picked again, we would relook at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the feedback I've received since, if Nextdoor is a gauge, that app or whatever, a lot of people that live in that Aberdeen woods, that commute out, that's a lot of the volume. There's a lot of concern there with speed cushions. You know, emergency vehicles, I think you've touched on that a little bit. There's been some angst about that as well. Like, are we damaging our vehicles, or are emergency vehicles being damaged because they can't get over these things or whatever? It was my understanding that these things were narrow enough that, EMS vehicles or a fire truck, they were navigating basically over these things without having to actually go over the top of them.
Yeah, no, they still encounter them, but I mean, from the very beginning, we worked with OEM and Chief Swan and all the rest of them and said, look, here's what we want to do. Are there streets we need to avoid? Is there anything that we need to do to work with you to make sure this is not going to present a problem for your operation? And they said, you put them wherever you want to. We will get through them. They're not, on balance, they felt like it's a positive improvement to safety. And so we've really had a great partnership with them, and they've been very supportive and don't feel like it's a real hindrance to their mission. So I kind of leave it with them. If they say it's good, I'm good.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, I haven't had those discussions, so that's good to hear. Locations of those, that's the two big hills right there. You've kind of touched on this a little bit. Oakley is actually a pretty narrow street. I was kind of surprised it's even 20 feet, but there's zero sidewalks, very little, honestly, painted white lines that are even marked on it. So, and there's no shoulder really to walk on with, I've got 3 young kids, and really this is where this stemmed from. We literally got hit because a distracted driver and how people stack brush on the side of the road. That's how this application came about.
Okay.
So I don't know. Yeah, again, cushion seems to be the only thing. I'm not a huge fan of it myself.
Yeah, I hear you.
So maybe less is more on this situation if they do come in. But yeah, something's better than nothing, because again, I've seen people do 60 down that road. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, you can imagine we hear all kind of stories from streets,
Oh,
all
yeah.
over town. I would like your feedback. So the one to the farthest to the right is down at the bottom of the hill. So you kind of come down, there's a sag, and then you go back up. I've got one in there. It would be a lot like what you have over on Overton Road. I'm familiar with that one. You go down the hill, and you talk about a narrow road. That's a narrow one. Those speed cushions are some of the oldest that I know of. Those are the old asphalt ones, but there is one right down at the bottom of the hill there. I think it works okay. I mean, it's not ideal, but I do think it slows you down as you're coming down that hill. So anyway, I give some thought to that too.
Yeah, I mean, that's where people really gain speed.
Yeah.
Really in both directions, because it starts heading down. That middle cushion is roughly where my house is located, pretty close to that, just maybe a house or two down. But yeah, people From both sides, I see it. So that I don't think that's a bad location. Um, honestly, I don't really know how to weigh in on locations of these things.
Yeah.
You got a lot more
No,
knowledge
I
and
mean,
research on than I
there's
do.
that's right. There's not much. The only thing we're trying to avoid, we're going to avoid hills, and then we're going to avoid driveways as well. Our policy is we will keep them at least 15 feet away from anybody's driveway. You guys over here have nice big frontage. That won't be a problem. We'll have, I think, plenty of room to kind of shift it and maximize that distance to be away from people's driveways where we can. If we have our preference, we like to kind of put them on a property line toward at the end of that, so it's not right in front of somebody's door or whatever. We be as considerate as we can, but there's a lot of things out there we're trying to avoid, manholes, all kind of stuff. So uh,
Yeah.
we place them best we can. I would say on some of the feedback, we know there are people who live off of these streets that we're doing traffic calming on that use them every bit as much as the people that actually live on the street. We'll talk about this with the voting process, but they won't get formal voting ability if you don't live right on the street. You don't get to vote. And one reason, I mean, the main reason is because while those people are just as impacted by the speed cushions, they're not impacted by the speeding that's happening. So when they drive down the street, they drive through there and then they go home and they don't have to deal with cars going down their street as fast the rest of the time, whereas the people that live on the street do. That's why we limit the voting to those people who are most affected. So anyhow, just keep that in mind. I mean, we want all feedback from everywhere we can get it. If we can make a better project, we'll gladly do that. But people off of the street will not have the ability to vote. With that, I'll go ahead and jump into that, and I'm happy to come back if we want to talk more about the map or the proposal. But we're tonight right here at this red dot, the neighborhood meeting. After this, I mean, we don't have a huge participation here. We'll kind of reach back out. We've got one other tool that I want to show you here that is brand new, that's really making a debut on this project that I want to share with you. I think it may help us with some of that feedback. But after tonight, we'll move into the design. If we don't hold this feedback stage open a little bit longer, that's when we'll actually come out, walk the site, take measurements, and we will be able to really hone in on where exactly we would propose the speed cushions. And we'll develop a set of design plans. We'll post those online. Everybody will have access to those. And then we can kind of make a choice whether we need to get back together or not on a second meeting. It used to be mandatory, but we were finding that 80% of the projects would come back a couple months later to a second meeting. They'd be like, yeah, that's what you showed us last time. You didn't really change anything. And they were right. And so they said, NDOT said, let's just make that optional. If there's a lot of concern in the neighborhood, we'll come back and happily do a second meeting. But if everybody's pretty good with it, we just move on to the ballot process. And so you see that there in the bottom right corner. That's a 6-week process. I'll show you the details of that. And then if it passes, we move into the construction phase. That's where there's more of a time delay. We're still saying it's an 8 to 10 month delay. NDOT's really made some big advancements in this area. They've opened it up to a couple of other contractors, and so they've really cut down on some of the backlog of those projects. But there's still a little bit of. We just like to make sure people understand that we're not talking about speed cushions by St. Patrick's Day or something like that. It's going to take a little time. So the ballot process, everybody who lives or who owns property on the street will get one of these cards when it comes time to do this. You'll scan it, you'll put in some information, and then just vote if you're for it or against it. And what we're looking for is 66% of voters, not everybody on the street, but of the people who vote, 2/3 of them need to be in favor of it to move the project forward. Again, we do keep that open for 6 weeks. And here are the people who would get to vote. So it's anybody who owns property that abuts the section to be calmed, in this case from Trousdale to Cochran, including people on a corner. So there may be a few people that have a Kincannon address or a Stallworth address. I'm not sure how the addressing goes there, that would still get to vote, but because they have property that does abut Oakley. It's a pretty small voting group. I mean, that's probably one reason we don't have, a big turnout at this meeting. We just send these to this group, just to kind of to limit, we don't have unlimited resources to send out to everything. I don't think there's any businesses. There may be a vacant property, meaning there's just not a house on a property. There may be one of those, so we wouldn't typically send a card to them. If anybody does own more than one piece of property, they'll just get one card. But that's it. As far as the voting process, it's pretty straightforward. You can on NDOT's website, they do have a record of how votes have gone, so you can see every neighborhood that has voted and whether it passed or failed. That's my information there and NDOT's information. But here's what I really want to show you relative to coming back to us with feedback and things like that. You're welcome to email us. That's the Traffic Calming website. You can probably find it just by Googling Nashville Traffic Calming. But this is what I really want to show. It's a brand new tool, and anything you can do, Steve, to get the word out on this would be great. We'll certainly share this with Courtney as well. It's called Engage Nashville. It's a new platform that NDOT and I think other departments are using anytime that there is a project out there that we want to get public feedback on. So if you just go to engage.nashville.gov and you scroll down, you'll see, I think it's about the first or second project on the list is the Oakley Drive traffic calming. And literally there's only about 6 projects even on this thing. This is just getting off the ground. And it's pretty cool. It's got a lot of resources. It's got email addresses. You can call by phone and leave a comment. It's got a lot more resources in order to leave comments and things like that. There's a interactive map. You can put little dots on it and say, hey, there's a problem here. You need to look at it. Whatever you want to do. We think this may be helpful. So feel free to pass that, send the word out on that. Specific to this project. I don't want to keep you, but I'm glad to stay. If you got, as long as you need to, if you got other questions or comments or concerns or anything about it.
I think I'm pretty much good.
Okay.
Just kind of hoping there was something maybe a little bit less intrusive than speed humps, but
Yeah.
At the same time, I just don't know what else would, I've seen all the other stuff too. And it's, like Blackman, for instance, the squiggly lines and
right.
people are flying down that as well. So
Blackman's really a tricky one because, man, it's got like 12,000 cars a day. The volume there is just really,
it's unreal.
It's unreal.
Well, and honestly, Oakley, I mean, they only collected about 24 hours of data on that street on a Thursday afternoon, really, or a Wednesday to a Thursday. So, it missed out, I thought, on a lot of volume that typically happens, later in the week or whatever. But it's just such a cut through from the ag center is my only thought to get to continue on Oakley and on down to Regent and Franklin Pike Circle to get kind of on Old Dickory Boulevard. And I think the biggest speeders basically are that. It's not the people that have kids in the subdivision. It's people elsewhere just coming through.
Well, I mean, we may have missed something, but keep in mind, it's still in the top 25 of all the streets in Metro. So we have identified that there's an issue there.
For sure. Well, again, I appreciate your time and energy on this.
Well, yeah, and just I would encourage you and everybody else, if you feel like, what we'd really think we ought to try as a feedback sign or something else less intrusive. I mean, that's totally valid. Just give us that feedback, and then if we need to get back together or whatever, we'll do. And did you say you are the applicant?
Yes.
Okay. And I assume there were other like 3 other people that signed on with you.
Yeah, there was actually 5.
Okay.
A couple of them are older, so I kind of thought, maybe one of them would jump on here, but there's also 2 new families that have moved on to that street just right across from me as well. So they've got infants, or not infants, but like toddlers and under. So they like to walk. That I've seen that, so I know they're going to be in favor of this as well. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's just I'm sure you hear the same stories over and over, but it's
I mean, I do, but they're all unique. But I mean, what we also find is that, you know, there may be a lot of vocal opposition to it, but if you look through that list of how streets have voted, overwhelmingly, I mean, the pass rate is like above 80%. I mean, just
wow.
neighborhoods, when they get to this point and there's the opportunity to do something about it, most of the time they do. Not always. Some of them get really contentious, and you hate to see that. But I mean, that's fair. I think, you know, we see this as offering a service. I think it's something really good the city does, but we also recognize it's not for everybody, and so, you know, kind of put that say back into the people's hands. They
Yeah,
want it or
yeah,
not.
exactly. Okay.
Well, good to meet you. Thanks for joining us. And again, reach out. Hopefully through that Engage, but through my email if that's easier and what you're going to do. And look forward to working with y'all.
Okay. Thanks again, Jeff.
All right. Thanks. Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris. See you later.